Well, Destry, today we're going to be shooting from the hip. So there's not really an established topic, but it's going to be fun today on the Deep Dives, episode 36. Well, Destry, it's Thursday, and kind of an interesting story behind how today has developed. So, snapshot of my week, right? Sunday, I'm at church, taking notes for what's going to be coming up on the podcast. Taking notes on the sermon and getting ideas for what we're going to talk about, and then Monday, work day, Tuesday. I'm involved in, informally lead a Bible study on Tuesday nights at a local coffee shop. Wednesday, I'm usually, other than work on every day of the week. Wednesday, you and I teach the gun club, so you're usually prepping for the gun part, and I'm usually prepping for the Bible study. Right. And then between Wednesday night and Thursday morning is when I'm usually finalizing the stuff that we're going to be talking about for podcast, because we record on Thursday mornings. We used to record on Fridays, which was great because I had a day in between to sort of develop that. And then Thursday we do the podcast. Friday and Saturday is kind of like a day off. But what's funny is I've been getting up and starting my mornings around 4:30, 5 o'clock, just because it's really crazy busy right now with engineering projects and stuff. And so I got home last night after church, ate dinner, and just passed out. Didn't even make it to bed. I just fell asleep on the couch. And normally I would get up around 4:30, 5 o'clock, but my phone was still on vibrate from being at church last night, so I didn't wake up until 7-ish.
You're supposed to be here around 8-ish.
Right, so it's supposed to be here around 8-ish. So I got up and looked at my clock and realized that I'm late starting the day. So I have not had the ability to prepare for the deep dive portion of the deep dive podcast as much as I would have liked. So in a way, we're shooting from the hip. We're still going to be talking about stuff from Scripture, but it's going to be it's going to be a surprise to everyone, including myself, where it ends up.
Good. That sounds good.
Yeah.
We've done that more than a handful of times.
We don't admit it, though.
No.
Yeah.
With this iteration, not so much, but the hundreds of podcasts that you and I have done before together. We've maybe had an outline, but it went wherever it wanted to go.
Right.
So anyway, that's good. That's what we'll do. I know you wanted to ask a question to open us up.
Yes. So we've been doing this a little segment this summer where we ask each other a question, just kind of to let the audience know a little bit more about our backgrounds and how our brains work. And so today's kind of a fun one. It's what's a silly fear you have that you know is irrational? What's a silly fear you have that you know is irrational?
Well, when you say irrational, I struggle with that word because it's a fear and it seems rational. I've developed a fear of heights that I haven't always had. So either I've had it or it's just gotten worse. And for those of you who don't share that fear, this is the way it feels in me. Whenever I'm up high and I can see the edge, going up in a big building or something. If I'm in the middle of the building having a meeting, I don't always fear being up in the building. But the closer I get to a window or closer I get to where there's not, any structure, it feels like there's a magnet pulling me towards that. And that's the only way I can really. I feel like I have to sit down. I have to hold on to something. And with Meniere's disease that I have, I don't want to get real. It makes it even worse because I don't want to get dizzy. whenever I'm, close to something like that.
Right.
I've gone up with our friend Don to take pictures of the Blue Angels here in Pensacola, Florida. Went into the lighthouse, the old lighthouse. It's been redone, and man, there's no room up there.
Mm-hmm.
There's at the top of the lighthouse, with your back against the structure of the lighthouse, you can reach out and grab onto the railing, and over that railing is 800 feet or however many feet of nothing until you go flat to the ground.
Right.
That's a challenge for me.
Yeah. Do you get that little tingling like in the back of your legs?
No tingling. It's just a very unstable. Holding on to the wall and holding on to the railing, I'm stable.
Yeah.
But like walking around, like if somebody needs to get by, I'm not going to get out on that railing, let them go by. I'm coming into the close part. I'm coming into the structure and letting them go out on the outside on the railing, because you have to do that. It's so narrow up there. And a while back, I got up onto our house to see if we needed. I think I was looking at before we got a new roof. I was looking at the shingles to see, if I picked them up, if they rebounded well or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I got up there okay. Listen, we live in a one-story house. It's only one story, man.
Yeah.
It's a small house. I got up there okay, but getting down, the transition from being on the roof to getting on the ladder, I didn't know how I was going to do it. And I didn't think it through. I got up there, everything's fine. I didn't stand up. I didn't want. I had my, I was crawling around on fours with my hands and my feet, and I didn't even go up to the very top of the house. I just kind of checked some shingles, and I started going down before I got on the ladder, and I looked at it and I went, how am I gonna transition? It's that transition from being on the roof to turning around and going back down on the ladder. That was a huge challenge, and I didn't anticipate that. As soon as I got down, I said to myself, I will never do that again. There's no reason for me ever to go up on any kind of roof unless I absolutely have to, because I was by myself, and that was before Meniere's even came into my head.
Yeah. And what is Meniere's again?
It's an equilibrium thing, is what I call it.
Okay.
It manifests itself in me by me losing total sense of time, space. I can't stand up. I can't even sit down. I have to lay flat down. And if I lay flat down, first of all, I'm not using any muscles. The more strain, anything. If I have to look for my pills or look for my phone, I do that really, really early on in the onset of these symptoms. If not, I can't do it without getting sick. Any kind of exertion at all brings me closer to nausea. In cold sweats, just dripping sweat, and rapid, shallow breaths. It's just really weird, man. I just lose total control of myself. For me, that's the way Meniere's manifests itself. I was talking to somebody yesterday in the gun club. They get a little dizzy, and she was describing to me that she gets dizzy and she has to hold on to somebody to walk. And I was thinking, boy, I'd like to have a problem walking. There's no way, Josh, that I could walk, stand up, look at you in the eye, do anything. I'm totally out of it. I can still hear, you know what I mean? I can hear, I can talk a little bit, but again, that's exertion that brings me closer to being nauseous. I'm already nauseous. It just brings me closer to throwing up. So anyway, that's the way it is in me, and I've learned from the doctors at Meniere's is a spectrum, so it affects people in a variety of ways, and we all share some common symptoms. So anyway, it'd be great to have that on top of a 800-foot lighthouse footed.
Yeah. No, that's interesting though. It's interesting you say that about heights too, because I was kind of the same way. Like I never really had a fear of heights that I can remember growing up. I mean, there's always sort of in the background a fear of falling from heights, and
I guess that's really the fear.
yeah. But what I've noticed about how my fear of heights has sort of developed over time is kind of a weird development, because like I remember a couple of years ago, my family and I, we went on this vacation up to Tennessee, and one of the places we went to was Rock City, and it's this place like on the edge of a cliff where and there's all these like rock paths and stuff that you can walk around and like be in amongst all these rock formations and caves and different things like that, and it culminates at the top where you're on the edge of this cliff, and they have a whole thing built out there with railing and like little concession stands and displays about what you're looking at from that vantage point. And if I remember correctly, from that vantage point, you can look out and see 4 different states. Might be more, but I think it was 4 states. But so we were up there, and I mean the view is breathtaking. I mean, just absolutely beautiful.
Smoky Mountains, right?
Appalachian Mountains, I believe. Yeah. So we're out there and we're looking at all that. The path up to it, is equally as beautiful, although it's not as far reaching. But as we're walking up, I'm starting to feel like this, there's this like weird angst or something, inside. And like when I'm standing there looking over the edge, sort of the back of my legs start tingling and,
really?
Different things like that. And, it's still beautiful. And I remember like taking my phone out and taking pictures of it. And the moment I took my phone out, it's like the fear just ramped up.
Oh, wow.
And I think it was because, like, in my mind, the irrational part of it was like, there's no way that I can securely keep a hold of my phone at this height, and I'm most likely going to drop it. Mm-hmm. And if I drop it, there's no way of getting it back because it's going to fall, 1,000 feet, into the into the abyss below and all that stuff. And it was, the part about heights isn't necessarily the irrational part, but the fact that it increased so dramatically when I took out my phone.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm only holding my phone by like 2 fingers, so I can take pictures with it and everything. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of a weird experience. Like, why do I care so much about that little stupid phone?
I think it's something to do with, I don't know. If I'm looking through a camera, it's a challenge. I can see why you would lose footing if you look through a camera lens. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because you look through a camera lens, this is a whole different world. But you're holding it up in front of you and looking through there. I don't know. Do you still have a fear of heights in a certain way?
Yes and no. I mean, a little bit. Like it wasn't as noticeable as it was until after I pulled my phone out. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm just walking around, I have my hands on stuff. Like it's there in a sense, but not as much.
Right. Yeah. Gotcha.
So I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the weird irrational component of that.
That's the weird irrational stuff. Other than that, hey, I'm fine. We're good.
Yeah.
That's only. I think the older, at least the older I get, the more I'm okay being out of control of things. But that's just something that it has control over me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's a strange feeling in itself.
Right.
But going up I have plans on going up in the lighthouse again. I've done it 2 or 3 times, I think, with Don.
Yeah.
It's not.
I would go to Rock City again in Tennessee. It was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah. This time it would be interesting, though, to do an experiment and have some sort of lanyard attached to my phone so that I wasn't able to, just to see if that irrational part goes away.
You can put it on a tripod too, or whatever, sit down. That would be interesting. I don't think I would. I don't think I would go up in the lighthouse just for the sake of going up in the lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
Zero desire. Hey, you want to go up in the lighthouse and just look? No, there's nothing I'd rather not do more than that.
Yeah.
If that
See, and
makes
I've
sense.
done that, and I enjoyed that. So, like the heights part, just by
Yeah.
itself, isn't something that gives me the same weird feeling
right.
as
Gotcha.
having something in my hand that
That's
could
weird.
potentially be dropped.
That is a real. That is
Yeah.
weird. That's weird. What I get out of it is the pictures.
Mhm.
I can get the pictures of the Blue Angels. You can't get those pictures anywhere
Yeah,
else.
that
you
is
know what
it
I
is
mean?
cool. I've been up there when the Blue Angels were flying.
Man, oh
Yeah.
man! And I've got a couple of goals as far as pictures. I've got some good pictures, content wise, but not as clear as I want them.
Mhm.
You know, I've got some printed and blown up, and with the whatever coming off the wings looks like smoke, but whatever is coming off the wings,
Mhm.
you know, when they're doing certain maneuver, man, that's
Yeah,
very nice. But I haven't gotten the picture that I want yet. So that's a goal. I'll go up there and try to
right.
reach that. But to go up there and just go, hey, look how beautiful. No, it looks just as beautiful from the ground to me. So
Yeah.
we're good to go. I have skydived twice.
Oh, really?
That was as a young 20-year-old. Really didn't care for heights then either, but it wasn't as bad.
Yeah,
I don't know if I could do it right now, man. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
that was something I used to want to do when I was younger. But then when I got married, especially when I had a kid,
Yeah.
I tend to reject those kind of ideas because of the the potential for something bad to happen if
Yeah.
the chute doesn't open or whatever. Same with bungee jumping.
You don't have it's a sense of flying, not a sense of falling whenever you're
Mhm.
skydiving. The farther you get away from the plane,
Yeah.
but when you first jump out, two things I wish somebody would have told me before I skydived. Two things. That's all I ask in life. One,
How to use a parachute?
I'll figure that out real quick. One was whenever you fall out or whenever you jump out,
Uh-huh.
be prepared for the feeling like you're going over the first big drop in a roller coaster. You're gonna lose your stomach, right?
Yeah.
That would have been good. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's what happened to me, and it took me a little bit to get used to that. And second, whenever you pull the ripcord, it's not an immediate tug. Man, that
You thought you were dead?
oh my gosh! Josh, whenever I pulled it, shrink, and then it caught me.
Yeah.
That time between shink and that was the longest, however many seconds I've ever had. It did not.
Yeah.
And you think about it, of course it's going to happen, but I was just like, I was hoping, boom, ting.
Right.
No. There's a couple of seconds there. It's going to feel like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But, once I was under canopy, it was beautiful. It was because I was able to control where I was going and when you're free falling, you control where you're going and how fast you're going by your feet and your legs.
Right.
And, you know how they're stretched out, and if you learn how to do it, you can go real fast.
Uh-huh.
You know, or you can slow down. And it's I've got it on film. We should look at it sometime. 'Cause
Yeah.
the first time I jumped out by myself, I went. I couldn't catch myself, and my instructor took me by the back of the pants and the shirt, back of the arm, and just put me out like a rag doll and
Yeah.
just hold me there. And then I got my bearings.
Thank you.
Yeah. The world was just going over and over and over and over. And anyway.
Was that scary?
Yeah, it was scary. I was totally out of control.
Yeah.
Totally out of control. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't jump tandem.
Uh-huh.
I jumped with two instructors, so you had to pay more to free jump, and you had two instructors.
Yeah.
So I did that twice, and it was fun. I'm glad I did it, and I checked it off the list.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Good. There you go.
Moving on to the next thing.
What's next? Bungee jumping? No desire. Never had a desire to do that.
Yeah.
I just never. Yeah, I didn't. Mountain biking, I mountain bike anywhere you want me to mountain bike.
Mm-hmm.
And funny enough, I don't really have when I was younger, I would do some more radical things like go over small cliffs and things. As far as height go, I never thought about maybe because I'm holding on to handlebars. I don't know, but I don't even try to do stuff like that anymore. No sense in it. But anyway,
Weird.
yeah, whatever.
All right. Well, so switching topics now. I thought it would be cool to kind of rehash something that I've been going over in one of the other Bible studies I do. Like I mentioned, I'm kind of involved in. There's this at a local coffee shop. There's this Bible study that my wife was going through because she works there at the moment, and you're a weird hype man.
Yeah, I am.
But
Bible study.
But I wasn't going to it for a while because not really for any reason, just because I don't know, it was after work and she usually just hangs out and goes to it, and then I leave work and go home and we meet up for dinner, and then because of something they're talking about, she asked if I'd be willing to come along. Well, then as I went, the people that I thought I had some misconceptions about it, right? I thought that there were two people there that appeared to be the primary source of content for these Bible studies, and I thought they were leading it. And then I came along, and I love the anywhere where we can get together and talk about Bible stuff. It's so interesting to me. I love talking about it and everything, and I get excited about it. Well, they're the two people that I thought were leading this, husband and wife. They ended up not coming back. I think they're getting ready to have a kid or something like that. But it ended up, or I was kind of like informally leading this Bible study, and we're going through Ezekiel right now, which it by itself is a really heavy book, and for a number of reasons, and we'll get into some of that here today. But one of the things that, as we're rounding up towards the end of Ezekiel, we're starting to talk about this weird temple that's going to show up at some point in the future. Not, if you look back at the history of Israel and the temples and the tabernacle and things like that, it's an interesting progression of how that works. And we're kind of going through this in Gun Club a little bit because we're doing a prequel series to what the church is going to do in August, which is called Return to Praise. And we're doing a prequel to that, talking about kind of focusing in on that word return, because that implies that at some point we left. And so we're kind of going through what the fall of man did to our relationship with God, and that whole process that gave us culminating in what Christ did on the cross for us in the resurrection, and how that paved the way for us to be able to return to God's presence. And so that's kind of the prequel series we're working on. And we've been going through different aspects of the tabernacle and the temple. And, if you look at the Garden of Eden, it was like that first temple that God built. We have the universe proper, which is, this is the universe in which God dwells. And as you get closer and closer to Earth, there's Earth where is a focal point of creation. The garden inside that, where man was created, or the area of Eden where man was created, and inside that, the Garden of Eden where man, the image of God, was placed. And it was our sin that separated us from that location, and that image was reflected in the imagery of the tabernacle, how we were sort of separated from the presence of God. Mm-hmm. And last night we were talking about the high priest, and how the high priest simulated perfection on behalf of everyone, for the purpose of going in once a year into the presence of God, to atone for the inability of humanity to be perfect. It was the atonement for sin.
He simulated it by The clothing, right?
By the clothing he wore, by there were different processes a high priest had to go through on the Day of Atonement to prepare him ritually to go into the most holy place of the tabernacle, the temple, to be in the presence of God. And over time, though, Israel, as we transition from the tabernacle to the temple, Israel, they always struggled with idolatry, and Ezekiel deals with this because Ezekiel opens up with him sitting on the banks of the Euphrates River, and he looks out over the horizon and he sees this huge procession headed his way and passes him on his way to Babylon. It comes from Jerusalem, and as he's describing it, he's describing, there's a throne, there's a presence on the throne, it's surrounded by these creatures that guard the throne. This whole throne is mobile, and it's traveling from Jerusalem to Babylon, and he finds out a little bit later the reason why is because in the temple, one of the key differences between the temple and the tabernacle, one was just its sheer size. One was the fact that it was it was no longer a movable structure, but it had compartments within the walls that ended up serving sort of like lockers for priests. And the priest thing is kind of what I want to get into in a roundabout way. We know the priests were the lineage of Aaron, Moses' brother, right? When you look at the tribe of Levi is divided up into three families: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And these three families of the tribe of Levi camped in close proximity to the tabernacle originally, because they were responsible for different parts of the tabernacle when it got packed up and moved. One family was responsible for like all the boards and the pillars and the stuff like that, like the structural guys. They packed those up and moved them. One family was in charge of the things like the tapestries and the curtains, and another family was responsible for the artifacts of the temple, like the table of showbread, the altar of incense, all that kind of stuff. And so these families were tasked with the upkeep and the movement of the tabernacle. And then under that one family of Kohath, you have Moses and Aaron, who was a family within the family of Kohath, and it was Aaron's sons and his descendants who were the actual priests of the tabernacle and later the temple. And Aaron being the high priest and his son becoming the next high priest, and that progression, that like transfer of that the office of high priest went through Aaron's lineage. Well, as families tend to do, they grow larger and larger and larger, and so over time there was a ton of people that were the lineage of Aaron, and traditionally the lineage of Aaron, they were the priests. Well, when the nation of Israel transitioned from having a movable tent structure in the tabernacle to the temple, a lot of those processes from the tabernacle had to be reassigned because it was no longer a temporary movable structure. So, those families, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, their responsibilities changed and were reassigned under King David. And then Solomon was the one who actually built the tabernacle, the temple. So in the temple, there were these little like lockers around the perimeter of it that served as like lockers for the different priests. Because as the family of Aaron grew, so did the number of priests, and the place started to get crowded. And so the lineage of Aaron ended up getting split up into 24 different groups, and these are all disclosed in Scripture throughout 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. I can't remember exactly where, but they were split up into 24 groups within the lineage of Aaron, and these groups end up becoming called courses of priests. So each course would serve for about 2 weeks, and then they would go away, and they would take a break. They would go back to one of the cities that the Levites occupied, and they would come back when it was their turn again. And this is alluded to in the New Testament when it talks about John's father, Zacharias. He was the course of Abiah. That means he was. It gives us the ability to nail down what time of year this was happening, because it was the course of Abiah. It was one of these 24 things. Well, as these priests followed in the tradition of the rest of Israel and were given over to idolatry and started pursuing that, they started accumulating idols, focuses of their pagan worship at home, and then they would start to bring them with them. Well, when they brought them with them, they started to store these idols in those little lockers around the perimeter of the temple. And so the temple, which is where the presence of God dwells, ended up being partially a storage space for all of these personal pagan idols that the priests of the temple were worshiping. So their loyalty was divided, and what ended up happening, their loyalty ended up getting entirely diverted away from God and toward these idols, to the point where it then progressed from just being idols stored in these little lockers to erecting statues of these idols literally within the temple, and the temple being used as a center of worship of these Babylonian gods, these Assyrian gods, things like that. And that's where we end up in the book of Ezekiel, because he sees the presence of God leaving Jerusalem. And he finds out later that the reason that happened is because of all the idolatry that's going on in the southern kingdom of Judah at that time, but specifically because the inhabitants of God's holy temple were erecting idols to pagan gods in that pagan temple. So the presence of God was no longer gonna tolerate that, and left. And that's the vision that Ezekiel sees at the beginning of Ezekiel.
Okay.
Is God leaving Jerusalem. And the presence of God was never in the temple again until we get to the New Testament. And it's interesting how God's presence visits the temple, because in the Old Testament, the presence of God, it filled that most holy place. It was like an ethereal presence, not like a physical, like something you could touch. It was a presence, and in order to be in that presence, you had to be perfect, and that's where the high priest comes in, which we already talked about. So, but once that left, it's an empty temple. It's God's place of habitation here on earth that he no longer inhabits, because we've transformed it into a place of idolatry. But in the New Testament, we see Jesus being born and him getting presented to the high priest, Ananias, or Ananias. I think it's Ananias, or maybe Annas. I forget which one, but regardless, he's presented to the high priest, and in this exchange, a statement is made that I've seen the Messiah, and it's interesting how Jesus as a baby is reintroduced into the temple, and that's really the first time God inhabits his temple since the days of Ezekiel, hundreds of years prior to that. And we see a couple times where Jesus goes back into the temple. In John, he's there to celebrate Passover, and he sees that inside the temple there are people who are selling sacrifices, money changers, and making the temple of God into a place of business. And Jesus gets mad, throws the tables over, all that kind of stuff. And so I was curious about this, like what was the time of this happening? Because when you look at at this time in history in Israel, there's some really significant things happening historically in the Roman Empire. As the Roman Empire came in and became the the ruler of the territory that Israel occupied. Israel, Judea, all that stuff, it became a Roman province. And because of the Roman Empire's relationship with Israel, they wanted Israel to be subservient, so much so that they, and we've talked about this before, that they stripped the Sanhedrin of its power. They deposed the high priest, which at the time was, that lineage of Aaron, and instituted their own high priest. So a high priest that was appointed by a Roman authority. And this all happened during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. We're familiar with a guy named Pilate. When we're reading about the crucifixion, Pilate's there talking about Jesus, saying, I don't find any guilt with him, but, you guys do what you want. I'll wash my hands of it. Pilate's predecessor was a guy named Valerius Gratus. He was appointed by Tiberius Caesar. And Valerius Gratus, he was the guy in charge who appointed this high priest that we read about in the New Testament called Caiaphas. Caiaphas was one of the longest, I hesitate to use the word reigning because it wasn't that kind of thing, but he was in office the longest of any of the Roman appointees. He would have been the high priest that was there when Jesus went into the temple and threw over the tables. Caiaphas was this Roman high priest, and so he's witnessing all this. Well, a couple of years later, Caiaphas is also the high priest that is in charge when Jesus is being tried and crucified and all this stuff, and there used to be this animosity between the Jews and the high priest because this wasn't an Aaronic high priest; it was a Roman high priest. But we see Israel working in conjunction with this Roman high priest, specifically to remove Jesus from the picture, and I think that's a really interesting point in history because Stephen sort of reminds them of all this. Stephen was the first martyr of the church, and he tells them, throughout your history, here's Abraham, here's Isaac and Jacob, and the 12 sons of them. Whenever they were presented with some aspect of salvation, whether it was salvation, taking them out of the land of the Chaldees, or whether it was salvation taking them or preserving them from the famine that had plagued the entire world during the days of Joseph, or whether it was prophets coming with a message from God about Israel's deliverance, Israel always rejected them the first time, and time again, he even says, like, which one of the prophets in the Old Testament did you not persecute? Which one did you not throw in prison or kill or whatever, or reject? You rejected all of them, and now here's a guy that is being presented as the Messiah, the culmination of everything in the Old Testament that you've read, and you're rejecting him again. Not only that, but you're working in conjunction with, you're joining forces with Rome, who you hate, who stripped you of all of your power. You're joining with them specifically for the purpose of getting rid of this guy who you hate. And he pointed to that as a warning, saying there might be something to this pattern that you want to pay attention to, and maybe avoid again, because here's the Messiah being presented, and you're rejecting him again, and there's punishment for that, there's consequences for that, but but here again, they rejected him, and they made him. And not just made Jesus their enemy, but purposely sought for his death, and worked with the Roman government to make that happen. So where's all this going? Here recently we see in the news things that the world does, and we get up in arms about, like, I can't believe the world did this. I can't believe the world did that. It's so pagan. It's so against God and all this stuff. And we don't realize that even God's people have a history of doing things in rejection of Him.
Right.
In our first tendency is often to like jump to the same tactic that the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, would do, and say, I can't believe how bad this is. You need to be gotten rid of. All this stuff, and we don't realize the failures on our own part, and we shouldn't be surprised that the world does what the world does. It's the world. That's why it's called the world.
Yeah.
And I think when we look back at all this history, there's an answer to it, but that answer starts with us. The reason Jesus came into this world wasn't to condemn everyone. They were already condemned. The reason Jesus came into the world was so that those condemned people would have life. And it's our job as Christians to spread that light, the message of the life that He brings.
Josh, I wonder what I would have kept in my locker if I was a priest. And I start thinking more and more. The older I get, the more I start thinking, what's my part in it? And I'm thankful for that. I think that's part of becoming a little bit more wise, because I used to be that, and I'm sure still that way a lot of times, but at least I'm trying to recognize it. You know what I mean? What is my part in it? And I think our listeners, I think if there's one lesson from this, it's start kind of at least entertain the thought, of what would you keep in your locker?
Yeah.
And what would it be? Something against,
right?
Or
and we all have that locker, and we all keep stuff in it. What is that stuff?
Yeah, what is it? What is that? What is that stuff? What would we complain about eating food that's coming from the sky for 40 years, or I'd rather be a slave. At least I put some jelly on my bread. Right. I got some hummus back in the day, now it's just this bread that's falling from the sky. It's all us. That's our brokenness. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't need Jesus, but I'm thankful that thankful that we do.
Yeah, and one of the comforting things, when you read through Ezekiel, most of it's bad news, because God spends several chapters speaking through Ezekiel to Israel, saying, punishment is coming, consequences are coming, it's gonna be horrible, life's gonna suck, all this kind of stuff, and because of all the idolatry that you pursued. But then after that, and he says, the mechanism of that judgment, in a large part, is going to be all of your enemies teaming up against you and destroying you. Well, then he turns his attention towards all the enemies of Israel, who are the mechanism of that, those consequences. He says, now you, as enemies of Israel, are going to be subject to my wrath, because you were the enemies of Israel. Yes, Israel deserved it, but you still made the choice to be the mechanism of that. And so, that blessing about, if you bless Israel, you'll be blessed, all that kind of stuff. If you curse them, you'll be cursed. That went through. But then, and so there's several chapters of God just pronouncing all this judgment and wrath on the enemies of Israel. But then he turns back to Israel and said, the difference between you and them is that while both of you are going to be subject to wrath and consequences for your actions, you're going to be restored. And there's going to come a day when we all fellowship again. And I think that's really cool, because God is not just a God of wrath and justice and everything. That all exists simultaneously with his love. And he always gives his people this message of hope, like, consequences come as a result of your choices, but restoration is going to come. And know that I still love you, know that I still desire that relationship with you, and that the resolution of all things is coming.
Amen. Hallelujah to that. Josh, thanks. I'll bring to our audience not one note. Josh didn't look at one note whenever he just delivered that Bible. So thank you, Josh, very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. And Chris, thanks for being here. And we'll be back next week, I guess. You want to do this again next week?
I think so.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. We'll see y'all then.
See ya.